Good governance and social responsibility on chapter 3 will tackle about the corporate governance. And the purpose of the discussion today is to demonstrate that corporate governance is a fundamental aspect of social responsibility. Now, first we define corporate governance and integrate the concept with other elements of social responsibility. Then afterwards, we will examine the corporate governance uh, as a framework and used in this book. Now, we will trace also the evolution of the corporate governance and will provide information um, on the status of corporate governance systems in other countries even. We look at the history of corporate governance and the relationships of corporate governance to social responsibility. And then there are also issues that we are going to be examining, the primary issues that should be considered in the development and improvement of corporate governance systems. That includes the roles of a board of directors, the shareholders, and the investors, the internal control and the risk management. Um, Even compensation is also being going to be articulated. And then we consider the future of corporate governance and indicate how strong governance is tied to the corporate performance and economic growth. Now, first we define what is corporate governance is all about. Now, a corporate governance is the formal system of oversight. Oversight included are the accountability and control for the organizational decision and resources. Now, oversight relates to a system of checks and balances, and that will limit the employees and the managers' opportunities to deviate from policies and the code of conduct. And then accountability will also relate to how well the content of workplace in the decision making and that is going to be aligned with the firm's stated strategic direction. Now, the control here is involving the process of auditing and improving the organizational decisions and the actions that's going to be recommended and provided. Now, companies want to develop or reinforce and redefine the policies in order to achieve consistency across organizational decisions and actions to be made. Now, the directors, the officers of the corporations are a fiduciary for the shareholders. Now, fiduciaries are persons who are placed in positions of trust who exercise the duty of care, the duty of loyalty in acting on behalf of in the interest of the whole of the organizations. Now, in every context like this, there's a history. Now, when you say history of corporate governance, it started in the 1800s and in the early 1900s. Now, the same people both owned and controlled corporations. Therefore, corporate governance was less important to discuss at the time. Now, during the 20th century, however, there is an increase of number in public companies and investors that is brought about in a gradual shift in the separation of ownership and control. Now, by the 1930s, corporate ownership was dispersed across a large number of individuals. And since the mid-1990s, the approach to corporate governance has involved a legal discussion of principal and agents to the business relationship, meaning owners are principals who hire agents, which is the executive, to run the business. Now, a key goal is to align the interest of principals and agents so that the organizational value and viability are sustained and maintained. Now, the lack of effective control and the accountability, putting mechanism on it in the early 21st century prompted a much higher interest in corporate governance and resulted in the laws such as the Sarbanes-Oakley. If I may repeat, Sarbanes-Oakley Act of 2002. Well, I'm sorry, of 2002. The collapse of the U.S. financial system in 2008 has caused many to question the government's institution that provide the oversight and the regulation. Now, in response to the financial crisis, the recession, the Obama administration began to work on legislation that would reform the corporate governance and provide the additional oversight. Okay? And then the corporate governance and social responsibility are being, compared to and, defined even. The shareholder model of corporate governance is founded in classic economic precepts, including the maximization of wealth for the investors and the owners. Now, the shareholders' orientation should the drive management's decision toward the best interest of the investors. That would be the main focus, supposedly. Now, because of the classic agency problems in the corporations, corporate governance mechanisms are needed to ensure an alignment between investor and the management interest. Okay? Now, in the stakeholder model of corporate governance, the purpose of business is conceived in a broader fashion, bigger context. Now, this model presumes a collaborative and relational approach to business and its constituents. Now, because of limited resources, primarily stakeholder groups must be identified. And upon the identification, the appropriate corporate governance mechanism should be implemented to promote the development of a long-term relationship with the defined group. Now, because of a broader conceptualization, the corporate governance, they will focus on the stakeholder model of corporate governance. Now, in the social context, in the social responsibility context, in each model, the governance is organizing dimension for keeping a firm focus on continuous improvement, accountability, engagement with the stakeholders. Okay? Now, we go now to, after the definition, we go now with the issues of the corporate governance systems. It's not perfect, but things are happening. Now, first we tackle the board of directors. I, for one, is a board of director of a government agency. It's a Philippine Broadcasting. It's a network, Philippine Television Network, People's Television Network Incorporated, that is under the office of the president. Now, as one of the board of directors, we define how the system, policies, and are correctly identified and implemented. Okay? Now, going back to the context of the lessons. The issues in corporate governance systems are, we focus now on the board of directors rather. Now, members of a company's board of directors assume legal responsibility for the firm's resources and decisions, so which apparently I've shared a while ago. Now, traditionally, board members were assumed to manage the corporation's business, but in reality, it doesn't work that way. There are a lot of factors to be considered, and there are a lot of factors to be dispensed at accordingly. Now, today, board of directors are concerned primarily with monitoring the decisions made by managers and on behalf of the company even. Now, including choosing top executives, assessing their performance, helping to set strategic direction, and ensuring that control and accountability mechanisms are in place. So that's the there no. So that's the very essence and functions. Now, board of directors are experiencing an increasing accountability and disclosure mandates, um, which has led to greater board independence and outside directors who often bring expertise, competence, and diverse perspective to strategic discussions. Now, finding board members who have expertise in the firm's industry or who have served as chief executive of a similar size organization is a good strategy for improving the board's overall quality. An effective board can affect organizational performance, serving as a type of insurance against the business cycle and the natural highs and lows of the economy. Okay. Now, regardless of the size and the type of business for which board are responsible, a system of governance is needed to ensure an effective control and accountability. Now, we go to the shareholders and investors. A shareholder is concerned with his or her ownership investment in the publicly traded firms, whereas an investor is a more in a general term for any individual or organization that provides capital to another firm. Now, a shareholders, or particularly large institutional ones, have become more active in articulating their positions with respect to company strategy and executive decision making. Now, activism is a broad term that could encompass engaging in dialogue with management. Now, submitting shareholders' resolutions, attending annual meetings, and other mechanisms designed to communicate shareholders' interest to a corporation. Now, many investors assume the stakeholder model to corporate governance, which carries into a strategy of social investing, meaning the integration of social and ethical criteria into the investment decision-making process. Now, by the late 1990s, the social investment totaled more than 2 trillion in the United States alone. And social investing is also prevalent in the United Kingdom, across other continents. Now, shareholders and investors must have confidence that their money is being placed in the care of capable and trustworthy organization. Now, that's for the shareholders and the investors. Now, we go to the internal control and risk management. Now, the risk management is the process, and it is being used to anticipate and shield the organization from unnecessary or overwhelming circumstances, while ensuring the leadership is taking the appropriate steps to move the organization and its strategy ahead. Now, the internal and external auditing provides the linchpin among risk, among controls, and among the corporate governance. Now, controls are fundamental to effective operations because they allow for comparisons between actual performance and the planned performance and the goals of the organization. Now, controls are used to safeguard corporate assets and resources and protect the reliability of organizational information, and ensuring compliance with regulations, with the law, and the contracts. Okay, so internal control should effectively limit employee or management optimism or the use of corporate asset for individualistic or non-strategic purposes. Now, good internal control should effectively limit employee or management opportunism or the use of corporate asset for individualistic or non-strategic purposes. And good internal control should also anticipate and remedy the organizational risk. And risk is always present within organizations. So the executive must develop processes for remedying or managing its effect. Okay? Now, there's another one is the financial misconduct. And this is very dangerous and prevalent in an organization. Now, before the 2008 financial crisis, worldwide even, the opportunity for misconduct in the arena of subprime lending was widespread. And loan officers receive commissions on securing loans from borrowers with no consequences if the borrower defaulted on the loan. Now, some appraisers provided inflated home values in order to increase the loan amount. And some consumers were asked to falsify their incomes to make the loan more attractive to the lending institution. So this is a very good example of a lending institution. As financial misconduct happens. Now, the culture of unethical behavior was not apparent to a lot of people, while home values were rapidly increasing. But when home values started to decline, many individuals found themselves owing more than the equity of their home. And the failures and the unethical behavior of lending and borrowing institutions are more becoming obvious. Okay? And irresponsible derivatives trading with limited regulatory oversight gave traders most unlimited opportunities to manipulating the use of derivatives. Before the 2008 financial collapse. Okay, so that happens. Now, derivatives attracts individual investors because they offer the possibility of large rewards. But the basic premise of derivatives is to transfer risk amongst parties based on their willingness to assume additional risk or hedge against it. Okay, the hedge funding. Now, the financial institutions sold that what could be called derivative products because the true risk of derivatives was not understood or disclosed to the customers. Now, better corporate governance of financial divisions is dealing in risky instruments and combined with compensation packages that do not encourage excessive risk taking may help to minimize the widespread problems that is experienced in the financial industry in the 280 meltdown 2008 meltdown. Now, the federal government has worked to increase government regulation of the financial industry, but it is also clear that internal corporate governance is important in reducing the misconduct as well. Okay, now we talk about executive compensation. How executives are compensated for their leadership, for their organizational service, and for their performance. That has become a controversial topic. Okay, many people believe that no executive is worth millions of dollars, if you're talking about in the US, in annual salary and stock options. Even if he or she has brought great financial return to investors, they don't deserve it. Okay. Now, others argue that because executives assume so much risk on behalf of the company, that they deserving of the rewards that follow from the strong company performance. Could be, but within a controlled manner. Rightful and controlled manner and deserving manner. Now, others argue also that boards need to review the evaluation criteria of um, for executive performance that is used in the compensation packages as consultants even, and then disclosure of executive pay, and the industry standard for remuneration should be also be reported accordingly, and the ability to attract even top talent, the incentives for superior performance even should be clarified and specified. Okay, now what happens in the corporate governance around the world? Now factors such as increased globalization, enhanced electronic communications, economic agreements and zones, and the reduction of trade barriers are propelling the need for greater homogenization in corporate governance principles. Has to be unified. Now, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, a forum for governments to discuss, to develop and enhance economic and social policy, is issued a set of principles that is intended to serve as a global model in corporate governance. OECD. Yeah, I encountered that now during my term as a chairman of the board. Now, the purpose is to formulate the minimum standard of fairness, transparency, accountability, disclosure, and responsibility for the business practice. Now, these standards allow some room for cultural adaptation. Okay? Now, given those discussions, what is the future of corporate governance? Now, a corporate governance is primarily focused on strategic level. There is concerns for accountability and control. Now, a number of external and internal factors or forces are driving a business toward the stakeholder orientation and formalization of governance mechanism, despite the critics. Now, the future of corporate governance is directly linked to the future of social responsibility. Business leaders, managers will need to enhance or embrace a governance as an essential part of the effective performance. Now, government also have a key role to play in the corporate governance, and corporate governance will emerge as the operational centerpiece to the social responsibility effort. Okay? I guess the learnings that I provided here in the corporate governance has given the class, given everyone an insight on how we deal with the corporate governance. Have a good day.